Welcome to the complete animation of Mittens from Walt Disney Animation Studios' Bolt. Bolt was the last movie that Walt Disney Animation Studios made before they made Tangled. And the reason why that's significant is because Tangled is the time when Walt Disney Animation Studios really worked on modernizing their workflow. It's the big moment where Disney was like, we are going to really nail how we're gonna do 3D animation going forward. And doing that included a whole bunch of research and development, developing brand new tools and brand new workflows that they were going to use. And all of that research and development made Tangled a very expensive movie. In fact, it still is one of the most expensive animated movies ever, but it's kind of disingenuous to call it that because so much of the research and development that they did, they just wrapped up into that movie's budget. And so this movie was the last movie that Disney made before they had, their big paradigm shift with how they were going to make 3D movies. And I think the movie really holds up. Obviously the story is still amazing. I recently rewatched The Truman Show after having never really seen it all the way through. And I think that Bolt basically did what The Truman Show did, but so much better. Because one of the things you always think about with The Truman Show is, so what happens to him after he leaves and goes out into the real world? What happens to him then? The movie leaves that, unanswered, which, fair enough. I think that the idea of how does a man who lived his entire life in that sort of a world transition to the real world. But I think that the whole concept of a character's entire life is a lie. They think that they're someone who they're not, and it's all in service of having somebody who completely buys into the world of the TV show that they're constantly being filmed in. I think that Bolt just has a better story of that. And I think that Bolt just has really good characters. I think that the character of Mittens just comes so completely out of left field. The way that they meet, it's Bolt meets some pigeons and asks, I need a cat. Do you know of any cats that could help, that would be able to know where I'm going? And it, that's such a random way for the characters to meet, but then they do meet and their relationship just works. Now, one of the things about Bolt is I think it was pretty ham-fisted with its alluding to the fact that Mittens had been declawed. Because I am one of the most imperceptive, whatever, viewers of movies when it comes to laying down hints like that. Almost everybody I talked to, when they watched Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, the second that, the wolf bounty hunter showed up, everybody's like, oh, so that's death. The physical incarnation of death. That's the Grim Reaper. Basically, everybody said that they recognized him as that when they saw the movie for the first time in the first scene that he showed up in. And all I'm thinking is, I didn't catch that. It was a reveal to me when, the movie straight up tells you that's how things are. And I was just thinking, man, maybe I really am just awful at picking up those sorts of clues. But at least in this movie, in Bolt, Mittens is so ham-fisted about talking about the claws that we never see that one really stuck out to me as, oh, she's been declawed, and that's gonna be a plot point later on. I caught that the very first time I watched the movie, in the very first scene where she's like, you don't want me to use the claws. Like, I caught that, and I'm a little proud of that fact, especially because I was fairly young at the time. I believe, yeah, I was just in my early teens when Bolt came out. But the relationship that Bolt and Mittens have is so good. And I really like these strictly platonic relationships, because there are so many movies that are, focused on, a romantic relationship, like Rio, Blue Sky's Rio, that movies where, especially a male and a female character who become very good friends, but there is absolutely zero ever romantic anything ever. Like, that is so... It feels good. It felt good in Moana, the relationship between Moana and Maui. Those two characters, like, you could tell that there was some genuine friendship and absolutely zero romantic interest. Then there's movies like Zootopia, where the relationship between Nick and Judy seems like it was intentionally left a little vague about exactly what was happening there. So one of the things about Bolt is it does a good job of its character designs. Because, with cartoon animals don't have faces like humans have. Humans, we have pretty broad faces that make very, distinct expressions. And as humans, we can look at the faces of other humans and glean something about them just by the way their face is. Animals have less of that. And so in order to make animals more readable to a human audience and make them more interesting to look at, you have to change their faces quite a bit so that they have room to emote. And one of the things that they do is they make their faces and heads bigger. Like, Bolt has a really big head, and Mittens has a very big head. Like, if you really look at just how big Mittens' head is compared to her body, it's like, that's a pretty big head. But they don't go too overboard with it. There are some movies where the head is just so big, like Arctic Dogs. Some of the characters in that movie have massive heads on top of these really skinny bodies. But in Bolt, they basically reach the limit of how big a head can be on these characters without it looking really weird. Now, one of the things that I've noticed about Bolt, the last time I watched the Blu-ray of it, is just how much detail just doesn't show up that well. It's like this movie has really painterly backgrounds. Some places, like the trees in the back of this scene, they have a very just the way they look. It's not like how it typically is in a 3D animated feature. It's almost like a billboard that's way in the background, but it works. And I just feel like the 1080p resolution often obscures a bunch of those details. And I want there to be a 4K re-release of this movie. But I recently watched for the first time the 4K release of Tangled, and there were so many textures in that movie that just stuck out like a sore thumb. Where it's like, wow, the texture of those rocks and those stones, those were meant to be hidden behind a lesser resolution. And they kind of just really stuck out in the 4K version. And I think that the same thing would happen here in Bolt. And it made me wonder, do I really want a 4K version of this movie where the clearly low resolution textures will be, shown off on full display. Do I want that? And I think that the answer is yes. I still want this movie to have a 4K release. I want it to, because I think that the details that were obscured otherwise are worth seeing the details that aren't worth being unobscured, if that makes any sense. And I really think that every movie, no matter how low resolution its assets are, deserves to have like it presented in the highest resolution possible. Even if the assets themselves are super low resolution, like I'm thinking of Balto 2. That was one of the early movies that used, a completely digital workflow with both character animation and a bunch of the backgrounds too. And even just the 1080p version shows off a whole lot of really low resolution assets. I still think that a movie like that should have a 4K version in order to just be the definitive, here is the movie we made. Now, one of the interesting things that I learned about watching the special features of Bolt is this leash. This leash that ties Bolt and Mittens together. They, at this time, did not have any workflow to automate cloth physics. That leash, made out of, strong, stiff, but still flexible webbing, had to be hand keyed for every frame. And the animators who worked on it just said it was a very difficult task because, cloth physics, they're one of the things that is really hard to get right so that it looks like it should. And most of the time nowadays, cloth physics are all automated, where the character can move around and then the cloth around them naturally moves to follow. Like, that's one of the big things that Tangled did with its research and development, was getting, the physics of those sorts of things right, both in terms of cloth physics and hair physics. And Bolt didn't have the luxury of having those sorts of physics. And so when the story demanded that Mittens and Bolt be leashed together for a very large chunk of the movie, the animators really had their work cut out for them to animate this big, long, floppy webbing between them all for so long. Like, the animators said that they were very happy when they finally finished all the scenes that had that leash in it, because it was hard work to hand key that leash so many times. Like, every time I think about it, it's like, that must have been so much work for a detail that basically nobody would notice as long as they got it right, and a detail that everyone would notice if they got it wrong. Like, that's one of the things in animated movies that people don't appreciate, is the things that look mundane and normal are often the things that they had to work the hardest at to make them look that way. Because if there's, like, clipping between models, and there's shadows that don't line up, and just all those little things, if they don't get them right, then they stick out like a sore thumb. But if they do get them right, then they just look natural. And you can get away with a lot with character animation. People and animals, we sometimes move in erratic, unpredictable ways, and it's like the little quirks in how characters move that often just make the character. Where if the character sometimes leads with one eye, and their eyes aren't perfectly symmetrical in things. Those are often good because people aren't perfectly symmetrical. If you ever see those images where they show, here is what somebody's face looks like if the left looks completely like the right, it just looks off because people are largely symmetrical, but not perfectly symmetrical, and having a little bit of asymmetry in characters helps. So, when I first saw this movie, I thought that Rhino was, the best of the characters because, he's a goofy guy. He's very serious about the things that he's serious about, and he chooses to believe the world as it's presented to him. Like, Rhino could be more intelligent, but it's like a conscious choice to just, I like to perceive the world how I like to perceive it, and I'm not going to change it. And, for real people, that can sometimes be a very dangerous thing. But Rhino is also optimistic and good-hearted. And so I think that those two qualities put together make it so that Rhino's delusions about the world turn out to be a positive character trait rather than a negative one. One of the other things that I learned about with the making of Bolt is that they actually went to all of the major locations and got a whole ton of reference footage and photographs. They actually sent teams out to New York City, to Ohio, and to Las Vegas to take so much reference footage and photographs and use that to inspire how they would make these scenes come alive in the movie itself. And if you watch the movie, it's like, especially the Ohio scene, the scene in the trailer park in Ohio, it's like, this really is a hilly, forested area in the American Midwest. And it feels like it in there. The way the lighting is, the way you can almost feel that it's kind of humid here. Not oppressively humid, but it's fairly hot and humid. They really did a good job of capturing that. But one of the things that kind of sticks out when you look closely at it is the way that foliage, like grass, interacts with the ground beneath it. Like this shot right here, the grass is very... It feels like it's just sort of popping up out of the ground texture. There's not a good sense of exactly how the grass is growing out of it. It's just like, it's just popping out of it. And those are things that, just get better as the technology improves. Like, you compare Bolt to Disney's latest movie that didn't go for a more stylized version, so that would be Strange World, not Wish. Wish is a movie that is very interesting in its own right. I'll have to see about making a video about it sometime, but Strange World has basically the peak of Disney's current, of the style that Disney had going for a while, especially in terms of its textures and materials. Just the way that the world looks and the way it's lit in Strange World is amazing. Now, Strange World as a movie has plenty of problems, especially in its narrative and characters, but at least visually, Strange World is really, really top-notch. They really did well. One of the things that Disney pioneered, I believe starting with Big Hero 6, is using physically based materials and path traced lighting, which means that like this movie Bolt, it was rendered using a traditional raster method, which is how video games used to be rendered back in the day. But then starting with Big Hero 6, Disney started using path trace lighting, where it's the scene is lit by actual like physical objects in the scene giving off light. And you still need to have a lot of artistic expression there. I took an intro to 3D modeling class back in college, and the professor there talked a bit about this, and he said that there was Frozen and then there was Big Hero 6. And Frozen was basically the peak of Disney's old raster method of lighting their movies, where Big Hero 6 was the first generation of Disney using their path trace lighting. And he said that he prefers the lighting in Frozen over Big Hero 6. But, you know, as Disney gets better and better with path trace lighting, it's gotten better. In fact, there are so many parts of this movie, specifically in lighting and textures, that makes me wish that Bolt had been made now. What I mean is, I wish that Bolt could be basically remade, where they take the exact everything. It's the exact same movie. They just replace a bunch of stuff with the best version that our current technology could have. And that's one of the things that 3D animation does that 2D animation really doesn't. Because, like, you look at Snow White and the Seven Dwarves, it looks just as good today as it did the day it came out. You watch the 4K version, and it's like, this is an incredible, beautiful movie. The hand-painted backgrounds are even more beautiful now at a higher resolution. The hand-painted cells are more beautiful now than they were ever before, unless you were able to actually watch, you know, the master film. But 3D animation, it's like it took so long to get to the point that it is now that basically everything between Toy Story and then about 2016, it shows its age in one way or another. The movies can still be good, you know, good voice acting, good stories, good cinematography, good character animation. Those are eternal, but texture resolution isn't. And so I wish that Bolt had been made now. The exact same movie, just with better lighting and textures. But it's still an amazing movie that I recommend. Thanks for watching.